He thought she was just another black woman he could intimidate, just another face behind the wheel on a dark highway. No badge, no rank, no reason in his eyes to be treated with anything but suspicion. But what Sergeant Logan Sykes didn't know was that Jasmine Monroe wasn't just anyone. And by the time she walked into that courtroom the next morning, his badge, his reputation, and his entire career were already burning. The night was heavy with humidity, the kind that soaked through your clothes and made the air feel like it was pressing down on your shoulders. Rain had just passed through Shreveport, Louisiana, leaving the streets slick and glistening like oil under the faint yellow streetlights. Only a few cars moved along the stretch of I-49 southbound. It was late 11:06 p.m. to be exact, the kind of hour when most people just want to get home, take off their shoes, and forget the day. Lieutenant Commander Jasmine Monroe gripped the steering wheel of her black Chevy Malibu, her fingers tapping lightly in rhythm with the soft jazz humming through the speakers. She wasn't in uniform tonight, just a black sweater, a pair of fitted jeans, and sneakers. Her hair was pulled back in a tight, low bun, casual, unassuming, invisible. Or so she thought. She just completed a 2-day debrief at Barksdale Air Force Base. Officially, she was off duty. Unofficially, she never really was. Years in the military had trained her to stay alert even when the mission was over. But tonight, she was tired. Not broken, not drained, just tired. A long day of briefing commanders and coordinating joint task ops will do that to anyone, no matter how composed they looked on the outside. The road curved gently left. She glanced at her side mirror, and that's when she saw it. Flash, 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 red and blue, closer, fast. She didn't panic, didn't curse, didn't even flinch. She just sighed deeply. She knew how this went. This wasn't her first late-night pullover in the South, and sadly, she knew it wouldn't be her last. She signaled, calmly shifted into the right lane, and pulled onto the narrow shoulder, her tires crunching against gravel and soaked leaves. She shifted the car into park, turned off the radio, both hands visible on the wheel, everything by the book. Behind her, the white cruiser came to a slow stop, its high beams still on, flooding her car with blinding light. She could see the outline of the officer still sitting, waiting, like a hunter measuring his prey. Finally, after a long minute, the door creaked open. Heavy boots hit wet asphalt. Slow, deliberate, confident. A flashlight clicked on beam, trained straight ahead as the silhouette moved closer. Jasmine angled her eyes to the side mirror. She could see him clearly now. Sergeant Logan Sykes. Mid-40s, buzz cut, pale face partially shadowed under the brim of his patrol hat. His hand hovered near his belt, not near a gun, but close enough to make a point. And his expression? That smug, worn-down look of someone who thought the uniform made him a king. He didn't say hello, didn't offer a reason, didn't ask how her night was going. License and registration, he said flatly. No emotion, no respect. Jasmine met his eyes through the mirror, then slowly reached toward her glove compartment. She kept her movements deliberate, unthreatening. "Was I speeding, officer?" she asked calmly, her voice even. Sykes didn't answer. He snatched the documents from her hand, holding them up to the light, still standing outside, his flashlight sweeping over her car. "Taillights out," he said casually. No proof, no check, just a line. Jasmine blinked. "That can't be right. I had them checked 2 weeks ago." Sykes stopped scanning, his eyes narrowed. "You arguing with me?" There it was, that shift in tone, that power flex. She'd seen it before on foreign soil, in male-dominated briefings, in interrogation rooms overseas. She knew the look of a man who expected her to shrink, but she didn't. "No," she said slowly. "I'm just saying I maintain my vehicle. If there's an issue, I'll gladly get it fixed." That should have been the end of it. A warning. Maybe a citation. But not tonight. Sykes took a step closer. "Step out of the car," he ordered. Jasmine blinked again. "Mind telling me why?" His lip twitched, a smirk, or maybe a warning. "Because I said so." Her jaw tightened, but she kept her breathing steady. Years of Navy training kicked in. No sudden moves, no raised voice, just control. She unbuckled her seatbelt and opened the door. The air was thick, cool still. She stepped out slowly, her stance relaxed but measured. She wasn't a threat, but she wasn't a pushover either. Sykes stepped back and scanned her eyes trailing over her as if searching for an excuse. Turn around, hands on the hood. She hesitated. For what reason? Sykes leaned forward, his voice dropped. Are you resisting? And in that moment, Jasmine Monroe knew this wasn't about a taillight. This wasn't about a traffic violation. This was about control. And unfortunately for him, he had just picked the wrong woman on the wrong night in the wrong city. The gravel crunched under her sneakers as Jasmine slowly turned to face her car. The coolness of the hood pressed against her palms, the metal still slick with leftover rain. Behind her, she could hear Sykes's footsteps drawing closer. Deliberate, heavy, possessive. She felt him pause, sizing her up, like he was deciding how far he could push. Hands higher, he barked. Jasmine adjusted her posture slightly. She didn't react with fear. She didn't flinch. She had learned long ago on the battlefield and in boardrooms that silence could be louder than shouting. She heard the sharp click of handcuffs, the metal scraping against itself like a threat. Without warning, he grabbed her left wrist tight, too tight, then yanked her right arm behind her back, locking both into place. The cuffs bit into her skin. That's unnecessary, she muttered under her breath. What was that? Sykes leaned in, smug. I didn't quite hear you. Jasmine didn't answer. She didn't need to. The way she stood, still composed, still balanced, still dignified, was answer enough. You're under arrest, he declared. For what? She asked. Obstructing an officer. He said it like a script, robotic, hollow. Jasmine exhaled through her nose. So that was his game. Fabricate a charge. Write the report later. Bank on her silence. But she wasn't built to be silent. She felt the tug as he led her toward his cruiser, gripping her like she was a flight risk. You don't know what you're doing, she said quietly. He chuckled. Lady, I know exactly what I'm doing. But he didn't, not even close. He shoved her into the back seat. The plastic bench was hard, unforgiving. Her wrists throbbed against the cold metal of the cuffs. Her spine pressed against the divider designed to make people feel like criminals, no matter who they were. Slam. The door closed, sealing her in. Outside, Sykes strutted back to his seat, muttering something into the radio like he was reporting a takedown. She watched him through the glass, his reflection layered over her own. He looked proud. She looked still. But inside her, something had shifted. Not fear, not rage, but clarity. He had no idea who he had just handcuffed. The cruiser jerked forward as he pulled back onto the road, lights still flashing. The city blurred past them, quiet, sleeping, unaware. Sykes glanced at her in the rearview mirror. Most people know better than to give me attitude, he said casually. Jasmine didn't reply. He snorted. Let me guess. Military. Still no answer. Yeah, he continued. You got that look, like you think you're above the law. She met his eyes through the mirror. I don't think that. I know the law. And I know you just broke it. That made him pause. His hands flexed on the steering wheel. For a second, the smirk slipped, but then he caught himself. Could have avoided all this, he muttered, if you'd just played along. Jasmine didn't respond. She didn't need to. The truth was already unraveling inside him. He just didn't realize how fast the thread was pulling loose. They pulled into the station, a dull, box-shaped building tucked between a laundromat and an abandoned gas station. Sykes parked in the reserved space, turned off the lights, and stepped out. Then yanked open her door without a word. The cuffs were still too tight. She twisted her wrists subtly, trying to relieve the pressure as he guided her through the front entrance. The air inside smelled like burnt coffee, paper forms, and mildew. The night shift sergeant barely looked up, just nodded and pushed a clipboard across the desk. Fingerprints, mugshot, paperwork, no conversation, no questions. They didn't see her. Not really. To them, she was just another booking, another case number. It was that same systemic numbness she'd seen in war zones, the kind of apathy that let monsters thrive. When the process was over, Sykes shoved the cuffs back on, tighter than before. He muttered something under his breath, something she didn't catch and wouldn't dignify. He pushed open the metal door to the holding cells. You think you're smart, he sneered. She looked sideways at him. I don't have to think. He scowled. Enjoy your stay. The cell was small concrete walls, steel bench, flickering fluorescent light overhead. No blanket, no pillow, no apology. The door clanged shut behind her, and for a moment everything was still. She sat, rolled her shoulders, exhaled. It wasn't the worst place she'd ever been, not by a long shot, but what made her angry, truly angry, was knowing the same thing had happened to others. People without her training, people without her resources, people without a voice, and she wasn't going to let it slide. Through the bars, she heard him coming. The same boots, the same rhythm. He stopped in front of her cell, arms crossed, smirk back in place. Comfy? She didn't answer. You know, he leaned closer to the bars. If you just kept your mouth shut, none of this would have happened. She looked up, calm, composed. Oh, I'm exactly where I need to be. That cracked him. His eyes twitched, his jaw clenched. For the first time, he was off balance, but he covered it up quick, scoffed, walked off. And Jasmine? She leaned back against the wall, closed her eyes, and whispered, "Let's see how loud the truth can be." The metal bench was cold beneath her. Not just cold, deliberately uncomfortable, like everything about the holding cell was designed to wear you down by the hour. Jasmine adjusted her shoulders, letting her back press into the concrete wall behind her. Her wrists still throbbed where the cuffs had bitten into them. But she didn't complain. She didn't pace. She didn't yell. She just waited. Because people like Sergeant Logan Sykes only thought they had power until the real power made a phone call. Out in the front office, the atmosphere was beginning to shift. It started as a murmur, a low exchange between the desk sergeant and a young officer, barely out of academy by the look of him. Clipboard in hand, he walked down the hallway toward the cells, eyes flicking to the paper in front of him, then to the number scrawled on the side of Jasmine's holding room. He stopped just a few feet away, hesitated, then cleared his throat. Sergeant Sykes?" he called out. Sykes appeared a moment later, still riding the high of his late-night arrest. He looked annoyed by the interruption. "What?" he barked. The young officer glanced toward Jasmine's cell, then back at Sykes. "You might want to come take this call." His voice carried an edge of uncertainty and maybe something else. Respect? Fear? Both? Sykes narrowed his eyes. "Who is it?" The officer shrugged. "Didn't say, but he said it's urgent and high level." Jasmine tilted her head slightly inside the cell. She didn't smile, but her gaze sharpened, focused. The shift had begun. A minute later, through the thin walls, she could hear Sykes' voice on the phone. It wasn't loud, but it was different now, lower, tighter, sharper. She could only catch fragments. "No, sir, I wasn't aware. Yes, I read her ID, but..." She didn't identify herself as military. "I followed protocol." But even through the muffled audio, Jasmine knew he was backpedaling. The footsteps returned, quicker now. Sykes rounded the corner, his face no longer smug. He stopped in front of her cell, jaw clenched. "What the hell did you do?" he asked. Jasmine looked at him evenly. "I didn't do anything." She let that hang there. But people talk, and some of us have friends in places you can't reach. His face twitched, just for a second. Then he turned, muttering something under his breath, and stormed off again. It was quiet after that. No more taunts, no more power plays. Jasmine leaned back on the bench, rolled her shoulders, and exhaled. Her phone might have been taken, her rights might have been trampled, but her name was already moving through the system like a fuse on a stick of dynamite, and Sykes didn't realize he'd already lit the match. Hours passed. The flickering light above her buzzed constantly, but Jasmine didn't sleep. She stayed alert, because she knew what was coming. And when the moment arrived, she wanted to be ready to meet it, not as a victim, but as a witness, as a force. Just past 7 a.m., the clank of keys echoed down the hall. A different officer approached this time, a woman in her late 30s, no nonsense in her posture, no emotion in her voice. She opened the cell door without a word. "You're being released." Jasmine stood up slowly. No surprise on her face, no thank you either. "My attorney?" she asked calmly. The officer nodded. "He's waiting in the lobby. You'll be briefed before departure." As Jasmine stepped out, the cuffs weren't reapplied. That alone told her everything she needed to know. The front desk was busier now. Phones rang, papers shuffled, Uniforms moved faster than before, like the station was trying to erase the stain before the spotlight arrived. But it was too late. Her attorney, Whitman, stood tall in the lobby black suit, salt and pepper hair, folder in hand. He didn't offer a handshake, just a nod. "They're already in damage control," he said. "We're going to court within the hour." Jasmine raised an eyebrow. "You moved fast." Whitman didn't blink. So did the Pentagon. They stepped outside into the early Louisiana sun. The streets were quiet, but the weight of what had happened during the night still hung thick in the air. Jasmine adjusted the sleeves of her navy blazer, one of the few changes of clothes Whitman had brought with him. Her expression was composed. But inside her chest, the fire was building, because now it wasn't just about what had happened to her. It was about what had happened to countless others who didn't have the connections, the rank, or the evidence. And if Logan Sykes thought this would disappear quietly, he hadn't seen the courtroom yet. The courthouse in downtown Shreveport looked like it hadn't been touched since the 80s. Old bricks, yellowed walls, fluorescent lights, flickering just enough to feel haunted. But today, that building was about to host something rare: accountability. Inside, the courtroom was already half full. Reporters lined the back row. A local civil rights group had sent observers. And word was, even the mayor's office had someone quietly sitting in the crowd. At the front, poised, still unwavering, Jasmine Monroe stood beside her attorney. Gone were the handcuffs. Gone was the hood of a patrol car. Gone was the assumption that she'd stay silent. She wore a navy blue blazer, crisp white blouse, hair tied neatly at the back of her neck. Her posture was perfect. Her eyes were steel. And across the aisle, nervous, stiff, blinking too often, Sergeant Logan Sykes sat behind the prosecutor's table. He still tried to project control, chin lifted, shoulders squared. But there was a tension in his jaw, a slight tremble in his fingers, and he hadn't made eye contact with Jasmine once. Because deep down, he already knew. He'd lost the moment he put the cuffs on the wrong woman. Judge Ellen Bradford entered. Older, sharp-eyed, with zero patience for theatrics. She scanned the file in front of her with a look that could cut granite. "Let's begin," she said, a voice curt. "Lieutenant Commander Monroe, please state your full name for the record." "Jasmine A. Monroe." "And your military status?" "Active duty, United States Navy, Lieutenant Commander, Special Operations Liaison." A quiet murmur rippled through the room. Even the prosecutor blinked. Sykes shifted in his seat. Whitman, Jasmine's attorney, stood and addressed the court. "Your Honor, what happened to Lieutenant Commander Monroe was not a traffic stop. It was not a misunderstanding. It was the targeted, unlawful detention of a decorated officer by a man who believed his uniform made him immune to consequences." He turned toward the projector screen near the bench. "With the court's permission, we'd like to begin with bodycam footage." "Granted," the judge said. The lights dimmed slightly. Everyone turned toward the screen. Even Sykes, though he looked like he'd rather crawl out of the room. The footage began. Rain, asphalt, Jasmine's calm voice. Sykes clipped orders. No explanation, no de-escalation, just control. Then came the arrest. The silence in the courtroom was suffocating. You could hear the breath catch in people's throats when Sykes said, "Because I said so." When he tightened the cuffs, when he shoved her into the car, when she whispered, "You don't know what you're doing." It was all there, undeniable. The footage ended. No one moved. The judge removed her glasses, exhaled. "Sergeant Sykes," she said, voice low, "do you have anything to say?" Sykes stood. "She was uncooperative," he said, forcing confidence. "She questioned my orders. That's obstructing an officer." The prosecutor interjected. "Your Honor, Jasmine Monroe has a spotless record. She's been awarded multiple commendations. No prior arrests, no warrants, no citations. And yet, this is how she's treated?" He walked to his table, picked up a folder. "Furthermore, Internal Affairs has flagged Sergeant Sykes for an alarming pattern. Over 80% of his discretionary stops in the last 3 years were black drivers." The courtroom stirred. Sykes' attorney leaned in, whispering rapidly. Sykes didn't respond. His face had gone pale. Judge Bradford's voice dropped. "Sergeant, I've been on this bench 22 years, and I can count on one hand the number of body cam videos that spoke this loudly." She turned toward Jasmine. "Lieutenant Commander Monroe, thank you for your service. You did not deserve this. And this court recognizes that." Then she faced Sykes one last time. The charges against Jasmine Monroe are hereby dismissed. Furthermore, I am requesting an immediate internal investigation into your conduct past and present. Boom! Her gavel dropped like thunder. Sykes looked like he'd been punched in the chest. His mouth opened, then closed. No sound came out. The bailiff stepped forward. People in the gallery began murmuring again. Whitman smiled faintly. Jasmine? She didn't gloat, didn't smirk, didn't say a word. She just stood, adjusted her blazer, and walked out back straight, steps firm, like a woman who had just reclaimed what was hers. In the hallway, reporters began gathering. Flashes, mics, questions. But Jasmine didn't stop. Because this wasn't about the spotlight. It wasn't about revenge. It was about proof that the system didn't get to define her, that Sykes didn't get the last word, and that truth, once unleashed, could not be ignored. The courthouse hallway felt like a tunnel. Sergeant Logan Sykes stormed through it, jaw clenched, footsteps loud enough to echo off every polished tile. He didn't look left, didn't look right. He didn't have to. He could feel the stares, from officers, from clerks, from the media, from the very people who used to look at him with fear or respect. Now they looked at him like he was radioactive, because he was. And the worst part? He knew he'd done it to himself. Sergeant Sykes, the voice cut clean through the tension like a blade. He stopped mid-stride. Turning slowly, he came face to face with Chief Eldon Baker. The chief stood with his arms crossed, his gray mustache bristling, eyes unreadable. He'd been with the department for 30 years. Respected, old school, not easily shaken. But today, he looked tired and disappointed. My office. Now, the moment the door closed behind them, the air shifted. No one else was in the room. No recording. Just truth. Chief Baker dropped a manila folder on the desk. It landed with a solid thud. What the hell were you thinking, Logan? Sykes opened his mouth. I was doing my job. Don't, Baker snapped. Do not insult my intelligence. He walked slowly behind his desk, sat down, and opened the folder. Body cam footage, arrest history, racial breakdowns, and a formal complaint from the Department of Defense. He leaned back. That woman you threw in cuffs, she's not just military. She's on a Navy counterintelligence team. They don't just forget things like this. Sykes tried to recover. She didn't identify herself. She challenged me. She questioned orders. That's not a crime. Baker's voice dropped lower. You didn't even have a reason to stop her. Your report said tail light out, but the dash cam says otherwise. Silence. You escalated. You ignored protocol. You cuffed a high-ranking officer like she was nothing. Sykes clenched his fists. She gave me attitude. She thought she was above the law. Baker's eyes narrowed. People like what, Logan? Silence. Say it. Sykes didn't move, didn't speak, didn't have to, because the silence said it all. Baker stood, pulled a document from the drawer, and slid it across the desk. Effective immediately, you're suspended. Sykes flinched. You're putting me on leave? No. Baker's tone turned cold. We're opening a full internal affairs investigation. And if what I already see in this file holds up, you're not coming back. Sykes stared at the paper like it was written in another language. This is bull. Don't finish that sentence, Baker growled. He pointed at the door. Pack up your gear, hand in your badge, and if you've got any sense left, get a lawyer. Sykes left the room like a man walking through a battlefield. Except this time, he wasn't the one giving orders. He wasn't the one in control. He was just another man whose power had finally run out. Across town, at a small cafe tucked between a flower shop and a barber shop, Jasmine Monroe sat in the corner booth, hands wrapped around a warm ceramic mug. Outside, the Louisiana sky had cleared, the rain was gone, and the city was waking up. Her phone buzzed, a message from Whitman, her attorney. Sykes suspended, investigation opened, DA may press charges. She stared at the screen for a moment, then took a slow, steady sip of her coffee. Good. But her face didn't show satisfaction. Not pride, not vengeance, only calm, measured control. Because this had never been about winning. It had been about setting the record straight, not just for herself, but for every person who had been silenced by people like Sykes. As she stepped outside, her phone buzzed again. Unknown number. She answered. Lieutenant Commander Monroe, the voice on the line said. This is Captain Owens with the Department of Defense. A pause. We've reviewed your case, and we'd like to speak with you on record. Jasmine inhaled quietly. Is this about me? Another pause. This is about all of you. Your story is just the one people finally saw. She didn't answer right away. She watched a mother across the street walking with her young son. The boy's hand wrapped around hers, carefree, unaware of the world he'd grow into. That's who she'd fought for, not just herself, but him. I'll speak, she said finally. And with that, she took her next step forward, not as a victim, not as a symbol, but as a voice. Jasmine Monroe never set out to become a headline. She didn't ask for cameras. She didn't seek applause. All she wanted was to make it home, to drive down a quiet Louisiana highway after a long mission, listen to the ayahs, and rest. But someone made that simple drive a battlefield. And Jasmine, she responded the only way she knew how, with composure, with strength, with truth. The story broke within 24 hours. Lieutenant Commander wrongfully arrested in Shreveport. Bodycam footage reveals abuse of power. Sergeant under investigation after detaining Navy officer without cause. Major news outlets picked it up. Social media exploded, and for once, the nation wasn't looking away. The footage went viral. Millions watched as Jasmine calmly obeyed. Millions saw as Logan Sykes escalated without reason. Millions heard her voice, firm, poised, and unshaken, even in cuffs. You don't know what you're doing, she'd said, and now the whole world knew just how right she was. Back at the Department of Defense, an internal review was launched, not just into her case, but into how often service members, especially women of color, face profiling on American soil. The Navy issued a formal statement. Military advocacy groups began calling for policy changes. Jasmine, though, stayed quiet at first, because this wasn't about the noise. This was about impact. It wasn't long before her phone rang again. This time it wasn't a lawyer, it wasn't a reporter, it wasn't even her commanding officer, it was the mayor's office. They wanted to recognize her, not just for her rank, not just for her restraint, but for showing the country how a true leader responds to injustice. Jasmine hesitated. She wasn't one for ceremonies. But something about this invitation felt different. This wasn't about honoring her. This was about shining a light on everything that still needed to change. So, a week later, she stood behind a podium outside Shreveport City Hall. Microphones in front of her, the city listening. She didn't prepare a speech. She didn't need one. She spoke from the only place that ever mattered, the truth. I'm not here today because I wanted attention, she began. I'm here because I didn't back down. She looked out at the crowd, diverse, watching, quiet. What happened to me is not rare, it's not new, and I am not the only one. A pause, Barasim. I had the training to stay calm. I had the lawyer to fight back, and I had the voice to be heard, but too many don't. Too many walk away with scars and no justice. She looked at the row of reporters. So if you're asking me what comes next, it's simple. We speak up, we hold the system accountable, and we never, ever mistake silence for peace. The crowd erupted. It wasn't just applause. It was recognition. It was release. Because Jasmine Monroe had just spoken for thousands, maybe millions, who had never been allowed to. Later that evening, she walked alone down a quiet sidewalk in Shreveport. The air smelled like wet pavement and magnolia blossoms. The city pulsed gently around her, back to its rhythm. And across the street, she saw a young black boy, maybe 7 or 8, walking beside his mother, laughing about something. His hand was wrapped tightly in hers, carefree, full of life. Jasmine stopped, watched. And in that moment, everything she'd endured, every insult, every click of the cuffs, every second in that cell made sense. Because she hadn't just fought for herself, she had fought for him. And for every child who deserved a world where people like Logan Sykes couldn't wear their badge like a weapon. She took a breath. The night air filled her lungs, cool and calm. She adjusted the cuffs of her blazer. And she walked away, not as a survivor, not as a headline, but as a symbol and a warning.